Welcome to another episode of the Financial Armor Show. My name is Jose Rodriguez, investment advisor here at Cooper Financial Investments, and your host for today alongside my co-host, Tony Shore. How's it going, Tony?
Really good. In fact, I was having kind of a regular Monday. We record this on Mondays, and it was a typical Monday. Started off a little rough, and then I got the news that Alex Hill was going to be on the show today. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, yes, something to look forward to on a Monday. The best special guest we've ever had on the Financial Armor Show is back for round two. So I got excited. I am excited. And this will be a fun one, and talking about a topic that everybody's been buzzing about, of course, and that's the big, beautiful bill. But I personally have been good this weekend. I helped my daughter move into her new apartment. Finally got that. We moved her back home out of where she was staying in college. Now that she's graduated, she got her own place with two of her friends, so we had to move her back. Hooked up the trailer, loaded the stuff, unloaded the stuff on floor 3. Not all of it would fit in the elevator. So, yeah. And it was 87 with high humidity. So that was not fun, but, hey, you know what? Many hands makes light work. We had a lot of her friends, my son and his wife, my wife, so we got it done fairly quickly. So,
now, did she get you pizza and beer after? Or
she did not. And in fact, she hinted at Mom and I taking her and her friends out to eat. And we're like, no, we're going home. We're tired. No, we're not going out to eat. You're on your own.
Well, at least it wasn't 115 like it was for us last week. It was ridiculous. And I think it rained. Well, at least in Mesa, it rained a little bit. Mm-hmm. So it was humid. It was 100 and humid. And I parked my car on underground parking in my apartment complex. And it was just like sticky. It was just way worse than what was outside. I'm like, what is the whole point of having underground parking and paying for this nice apartment? If it's just going to be worse.
It's a literal Hades inside those parking garages when it's 115. In fact, Alex, Jose mentioned to me earlier, he was disgusted because all his gold bars and gold bullion was melting. It was that hot. All the gold that he's amassed and hoarded.
But you can cook eggs on the sidewalk, so
yes, that's a big perk.
That's always
you can't
fun.
Say that, Tony. You can't do that in Minnesota.
No, I can't. No, but worse here. We've been in the 90s a lot with humidity, with like 85%, 90% humidity.
Sticky.
At least you don't have the humidity there typically. But like an idiot, my family and I going for a week. Next week I'll be in Palm Springs, California.
Hey.
And the average, the highs don't dip below 100 while we're there.
Yeah, very nice.
So we're going off season because my wife's got a big business conference week long, and they're putting us up at this huge resort that's beautiful. Right. 42 swimming pools and 5 golf courses. Not that I'm a big resort guy. I don't even golf, but 42 swimming pools at one resort.
Are
you going to get in every one?
No, in fact,
get your money's worth.
In fact, every 6 rooms has its own right outside if you're on the main level, which we are. So we'll share it with a few other rooms, but we'll basically have a pool to ourselves. And then there's bigger pools and different shaped pools. But you can look it up. La Quinta Resort in Palm Springs, 42 swimming pools. It's insane.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I've heard of it. Well, I'm about to go I'm getting ready to, this is going to be my last podcast before I go to Spain. So I'm very excited.
That's huge.
I leave on Sunday around 3. It's going to be a very awkward time to leave.
3 p.m.?
3 p.m., yeah.
Okay. Better than 3 a.m., but yeah.
Yeah, and then we're going to leave the States at 9 because of the layover, 9 p.m. So we're going to fly all at night, all of my perceived night, I guess. And then we're going to get there at 2. We get in Madrid at 2 p.m. So we'll see how this jet lag and figure this whole thing out. I'm nervous because it's my first trip like this, but I'm here for it and I'm very excited. But let me introduce our guest for today. And I guess he's now become a friend of the show.
Just a regular. Where's my T-shirt?
Yeah, really?
A T-shirt. I'll even get you a quarter zip. He was previously on the show. He is Professor Alexander Hill, Clinical Assistant Professor of Economics at ASU, Arizona State University. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Colorado at Boulder. He specializes in industrial organization, environmental economics, particularly within energy markets and electricity and natural gas. His research explores everything from market dynamics to government regulation and environmental impact. He also happens to be my previous economics professor in multiple instances during my college career, teaching me economic theory, industrial organization, which was a big one that I hated, as well as regression analysis, which is another big math. Everything had to do with math, and it just was a big old headache. But Professor Hill, I really appreciate you being here.
Love it. Happy to be back, guys.
It's awesome.
All right. Well,
it's great to have you.
Let's dive right in. And now the one big beautiful, what's the official name? One big beautiful bill. That's right.
That's it.
And it's officially law. And now that everything is set in stone, everything is signed into law, what's going on now? What is the impact? So what is the new, because they've changed a couple times and went back and forth. What is the actual new cost of the bill?
Yeah, so when you say cost, I think of, what is the addition to the budget deficit? That's what we're talking about here. And of course, bills don't have to be that way, right? Sometimes there are budget surplus bills. This one particularly, the impact on tax revenue is less than the impact on spending. So when you do the subtraction of the two, you get a negative. So there are different estimates out there. It really depends on what assumptions you use. The number that is standard right now is $4.1 trillion over 10 years. We do 10-year budgeting. And anything more than that, and it's kind of you don't know what's going to happen 20 years in the future, so it's more manageable. But of course, many of these bills don't just impact the next few years, so 10's kind of the sweet spot. And so we're probably wondering, well, how the heck do you get there? How do you get to $4.1 trillion over 10 years? And in order to kind of go there, I wanted to briefly talk about, very briefly, because I know econ professors get long-winded, why we care. Okay, so the budget deficit goes up. Why does this matter? And I thought of a couple different things that I think are important to think about of you, who you're listening, you guys. Why do you care about this particular bill? The first one is for people who are going to be around and be taxpayers and be getting benefits 20, 30, 40 years in the future. You are borrowing from that future for current consumption. That's the most standard way of thinking about it, that the government's borrowing now. At some point, maybe you don't have to pay it back, but you're going to have to change future benefits, future taxes as a result of this. There's going to be some impact in the future. We don't know if it's 4.1 trillion or what it is. You're going to have to pay some of that back in the future. You've also got a higher probability of a small negative impact, which is the higher interest rates that may come from this. Whenever you borrow, that is, you are taking loanable funds out of the market. You're taking funds that could be given to Intel to build a new plant, or homeowners for their first home, or whatever it is. And the government now is soaking that up. So what happens when demand outstrips supply, prices rise? The price of money, of borrowing money, is the interest rates, right? So now how big that is, that's where, the magnitudes are uncertain, but you should expect some increase in interest rates relative to what they would have been from this bill. So that impacts people if you're borrowers. That's a much higher probability than the very large negative impact. There's a small probability of what we call in economics a sudden stop, or a financial crisis. And that would be where investors start going, we talked about this last time. Okay, this is a big number. You guys, the United States, you're already borrowing a lot of money. When does this end? And there are countries that have experienced these sudden stops. They tend to be more developing countries, but it has happened to developed countries as well. That is extremely painful. That's, oh my gosh, people are losing jobs. That's 2008 all over again, right? Where everything, the stock market's cratering, it's all going downhill. So 3 things to think about there. And then just a fourth little point, which is if you're borrowing money from people abroad in order to finance this, you are selling a share of U.S. wealth, of U.S. assets in exchange for current consumption. So you're making the country a little poorer in wealth terms in order to do this. We're consuming now, borrowing from other people. Some of them might be Americans, but some of them might be from abroad. And so national income may shrink as a result of this. Not, relative to what would have happened. It may still be going up, but at a lesser rate. So just wanted to level set 4 reasons why you might want to care about the budget deficit. Higher probability of raising interest rates, lower probability of sudden stop financial crisis, but something to take seriously because it's so impactful. So that's why you should care. Numbers 4.1 trillion. These bills, remember, it's the one big, beautiful bill. So it's got a lot of beautiful things in it. I don't think we want to go down the list of all of the many pages of this bill. So
no, that's coming in a different episode.
970 pages. The word big is the one true part of that name is for sure the big. It is, as Trump would say, bigly, huge.
Yes,
bigly.
And it's got so many different things that usually these bills, they focus on a particular tax. You have the last tax bill, the 2017 one. This was really focused on changing personal rates, changing how businesses deduct expenses, a few different things.
Standard deduction.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people like, the higher standard deduction.
Yes. This is now defense spending is a part of this, Medicaid cuts. We're getting one big bill.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Definitely. And I even saw some, I was trying to read some of the CBO reports, and it was having a couple different projections as far as the deficit that would create. And it was a pretty big range because of the what if, because some of these are going to sunset, some of the provisions in it, right? And it was just assuming some of these are going to be, what if they're made permanent? And they made like a different assumption, and it went up all the way to 5 trillion if these tax credits, tax deductions become permanent.
Yes. Yeah. And that's relevant because look where we landed here, where 2017 bill, all of the projections said, okay, this is just for the 10 years here. Well, what ended up happening? We ended up extending them. So if you wanted to say that a big part of this deficit increase is just from 2017, you could do that. I mean, that's logical, is to say, well, we made these changes in 2017. What politician is going to vote to now raise taxes back to where they were in 2025? So really, this is 2017's fault.
Right. It was just, they kind of did the same thing here. So going back to the CBO's projection of GDP growth over the years from now until 2050, I think they have an average of 1.6%, which is less than what we currently have, right? And less than what it has been in the past 10 years, right?
So their growth projections in the future are slower. And we have experienced rises and falls over time. And this is something that's very hard to project. With rapid technological change, you can see boosts. And so it really kind of depends. And I think we've got a little graphic on this, what they are projecting growth rates to be in the future. I think it's the second one that I had put in there, where it has the 2 main components here, which is productivity and work hours. That's how much people work. And the issue here with why we're projecting lower growth in the future, regardless of this bill, is people are working a little bit less, but they're getting older and they're retiring and they're having less children. And so
demographics.
Yes. And so growth is the addition of the growth of productivity and the growth of your work. And if you don't have as many workers, that component's not going to grow as quickly. And that's part of where that slowdown comes from.
Right. And I saw an interview with the head of the CBO also said that policy uncertainty was driving, because he was getting bombarded, because it became very controversial that he said, well, why are you saying that it's so low? This bill is supposed to explode and make GDP be amazing, right? But he said, in addition to the things that you've already said, is that decrease in immigration, the aging population, and what was the other one? A policy uncertainty. And he said those were one of the big things why his models say that it was going to slow down. So last time we had you on the show, you mentioned that the increase in deficit could become an issue if GDP doesn't go up with it, right? And if it just dramatically, there's a difference here, then that could be an issue. So where do we stand now that we know somewhat the numbers of what the GDP growth could be and the cost? Where do we stand now?
Yeah, which one of these slides do you want first? Is this the one,
Alex? They're both relevant. They're both relevant.
Okay.
So let's go to the second one first,
okay.
And then the first one we'll tick in there. Okay. Sure. So what we've got here is I've provided a increase over time, a big time span, so it shows you the trajectory here. Now there are 3 lines. The top one, that is GDP growth in the United States that has been kind of adjusted for the ups and downs. So if I showed you actual GDP in a year, it would be, up and down, It'd be hard to show. So we have this term in economics called potential GDP, which is the idea of what the economy can produce at full employment. And so it kind of smooths out all of the wiggles from, when you have a recession or you have a boom or whatever. So what you see here is with this top line, the black line, you've got a decline over time in that growth rate. That's GDP growth. And then you get to where we are right now, which is kind of, it goes down, and then it jumps up briefly, and then it kind of smooths over the future. That smoothing over the future, that's their projection, okay? And everything before that is what has happened in the past. Now, you might say, okay, why? What has caused this line to go down over time, and why are they so pessimistic in the future? That's where the other two come in, because the black line, the top line, is the addition of the other 2 lines. So it is productivity growth plus growth in the labor force. And when you add those 2 together, you get GDP growth. Okay, so what you notice is the gray line, which is the productivity, that thing had a little drop in the 70s, then it kind of recovered in the 80s or whatever. So it's gone down a little bit, but it's really not projected to fall that far. Notice that a lot of the action is in the blue line. In other words, the labor force. So what we're expecting in the future is we're going to have a smaller GDP than we otherwise would have. We'll still be growing, but growing less quickly because of that fall and the growth in the labor force. So this is having less children is the main thing. Projections of slightly smaller immigration. Notice that jump there right around 2022, 2023. That was the surge in immigration that happened right after COVID. So notice that GDP growth rose and the labor force rose, but they don't expect that, right? That's already going back down. So now why is this relevant? This is relevant because of course, this determines our standard of living. That gray line, the productivity line, we want that thing growing because that's what feeds into our wages, and we want higher wages. We want more trips to Spain, right? So
more melting gold bars in the in the garage. Yeah,
that is what's paying for that, right? So we want that thing to keep growing, but the combination of the 2 is what pays for the interest on the debt. That's what allows us to run higher deficits. When we have a shrinking economy or a stagnant economy, debts all of a sudden become a lot larger. So last time when I was on here, we talked about this, about how debt is kind of relative to your income. If you borrow money to buy a car, and let's say you borrow $30,000, it's going to be a much easier burden if you make $200,000 than if you make $40,000. The same thing is true for countries. We have this debt. It's a fixed amount, and it can grow over time if we keep adding to it. But if the GDP of the country, our income, keeps growing, our debt burden is kind of smaller. That's kind of what happened to the United States in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, is that we grew and we didn't add on very much debt. So we actually didn't really pay off the debt from World War II. We kind of just grew out of it. And an additional point to make is, if you think about what that number is, so if you put debt in the numerator and then you're dividing by GDP, that is the combination of GDP and price growth, nominal GDP. So you can inflate away your debt in a sense. During the 50s and 60s and 70s, the United States had pretty good GDP growth, actually very good in the 50s and 60s, but we also had an increase of 2 to 3% a year in prices. Well, the debt's not growing from those price increases, but the GDP is. So what you'd like is over time to have that GDP to continue to grow. It makes the debt a lot easier to handle. So now if you go back to the first slide that I had there, this is one of the concerning parts of U.S. fiscal policy, and something that if you're an investor and you're worried, you want to know what's going to happen to my money over the next couple of decades, you might be concerned about what's going to happen with the U.S. Budget deficit. Maybe if it gets out of hand, you could expect future taxes, so that might impact you. Or the credibility of the United States could come under attack. That will affect your bottom line. So, however this ends up working out, whether we deal with this and raise taxes or we don't, will impact you in the future. And this is the thing that starts to become a bigger deal. So you notice that going all the way back to the early 60s there, we had interest payments as a share of our national income, GDP. They were pretty low, under 2%. They begin to rise in the 1980s. This actually was a serious policy debate in the 80s and early 90s. One of the main things that Bill Clinton ran on in 1992 was, we got to get these interest payments down. We have, our debt is rising a lot. Interestingly enough, our debt to GDP ratio at that time was about 40 to 45%. Now it's over 100%. So if it was an issue then at 40 or 45, I imagine it's a lot bigger, should be a bigger issue today. But then notice that it came back down again and it was pretty low, but now it's skyrocketed and it's supposed to then project to continue to increase. I put the number up here because I think it's relevant. We are projected to pay $950 billion this year in interest. That is higher than our defense budget. Now, I don't know exactly, the right ratio between defense and interest, but it kind of level sets it, because people say, boy, we spend a lot on defense, and we do spend a lot on defense.
Yep.
Well, we now spend more on interest, just on paying our previous debts, than on defense. And interest, in a way, is kind of the biggest cost of this borrowing, at least without, there's crises that we can talk about. But the interest matters because it takes away from other things you might want to do with that money. So maybe this $950 billion, we could have spent that on shoring up Social Security, or in helping with housing or food stamps, or reducing other taxes. So that's kind of a lost opportunity there. And I still remember reading in history books that on the eve of the French Revolution, 3/4 of the French government's budget, so this is late 18th century, was just paying interest on their debt. Oh, yeah. So we're not there yet. But obviously you see this thing starting to grow over time.
But but it's what, 13%, I think it was. What's the percentage?
So where we are right now, this number is climbing up to getting closer to 4. It's about 3.5% of GDP. Now, as a share of our budget, it's higher because, of course, our budget is only about 1/4 of our GDP. So you could multiply this by 4, and that's the share of our budget that it currently stands. But of course, notice that it's climbing over time.
Yeah,
right,
considerably. And isn't that what happened to Greece?
Oh yeah.
So they had both problems. They had the interest problem, but they also had the sudden stop problem.
Yeah, they had a sudden stop.
What do you do when investors are no longer willing to buy your bonds? And especially if you are borrowing a lot of money, you all of a sudden have to raise taxes a lot and cut spending. And that's when you had a lot of protests in the streets and people start throwing things, and they don't like that.
Right.
Yeah. And so if I'm hearing this correctly, the reason why we should care of this deficit increasing over time is because over time we risk paying higher taxes to pay down this deficit. And we're kind of seeing it right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, the decrease of the dollar, the value of the dollar, it's already down, I think, 10% for the year to date. It's coming back up a little bit, but is that another way that we could get affected by this? For example, I'm trying to buy euros right now to go to Europe, and it's better for my mom to pay the pesos and buy the euros. So it's
Yes. It's I ran into this. I was just on my honeymoon a couple months ago and ran into the same thing. And that was coming off a period where the US dollar was actually fairly strong. That a lot of economists believe that the dollar movements have more to do with the tariff policy and some of the investment effects from that than the one big beautiful bill. But the one big beautiful bill will have an impact on that. It's my belief, and I share this with I would say the vast majority of the economics profession, is that what we're observing with the fall in the dollar is a lack of demand for dollars, particularly to invest money in the United States, and some of that has to do with the tariff policy.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, that whole dollar conversation could go down another rabbit hole that could be another 2 hours.
This is economics. You start to get into so many things, and it can be overwhelming. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I guess I'll have one rebuttal, I guess, or one thing that I want to bring up that from an economist. I forgot her name, but she's the author of The Deficit Myth. She's very popular.
Is this Stephanie Kelton?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's her.
Yeah.
She's saying that we shouldn't care.
Yeah. So good. Let's talk about this. So
yeah,
now
I've heard that from a couple. They get a couple. They always find somebody that's going to say, "No, it doesn't matter if the deficit's $60 trillion. We're fine."
Yeah, and I guess I like economists to be a little. Of course, you have to sell books, right? So you got to make things
Sure.
gargantuan. But I like economists to couch terms a little bit. So if you've noticed during this, I'm saying we could see this, or there's a higher probability. I find that you can quickly lose credibility when you make such definitive statements because the future is hard to predict. So, but let's talk about that for a second. She is a proponent of something that came up. I remember this about a decade ago, called modern monetary theory. And we don't need to get into the weeds in this.
MMT. Yep.
Yeah. And mainstream economists have tried to narrow this down with them. And well, what's your model? How are you actually getting here? And it doesn't seem to have a particular model of how the economy works. It's bred more out of just a few observations. And the danger in that is that, you might be just seeing anecdotal things happening that aren't going to repeat themselves in the future. My take on modern monetary theory is that basically this deficits don't matter. The immediately people say, oh, well, then you're going to get inflation. And then their answer is, well, then you can raise taxes in order to bring that inflation down, which is kind of, so where would we end up? Well, we'd probably end up in the same place, because then you'd raise taxes to the point where inflation comes back to where we are now. And that would be, we'd have the tax rates that we do now. It just seems to be a very strange way of going about that in no way does any economist believe that you can print money and not get inflation. We have so many examples in history that is not
That's
true.
how economic theory exists.
Well, we can see, I can just point to a huge example of it. And I actually kind of chuckled. And I explained this. My wife was wondering about why I was laughing when they kept saying, I can't believe the inflation rate is so high a few years ago, when it hit 9% and was climbing. What's causing this? And I said, they printed $7 trillion worth of money to get us out of the COVID crisis, to restart the economy. You cannot inject $7 trillion into the economy and not have inflation, right? I mean,
so
isn't that why that happened?
Well, again, another rabbit hole that we can go down. So I'll try
Sure.
to keep my answer very short. There is a debate among economists about how much of the inflation surge that we got was due to supply side factors. So things
Sure.
like interruptions in shipping, factories shutting down because workers were sick, a shift in the composition of goods. That's more of a demand factor. But all of a sudden, we didn't remember like that thing where no one had any toilet paper, but there was tons of commercial toilet paper because no one was going to the office, and so people were buying like the huge rolls, right?
Yes.
So there's how much of it was due to that, and
Ah,
how much was
sure.
due to the demand policies,
Sure.
which were numerous. The Fed kept interest rates very low. There were 3 different stimulus bills, I think.
Yeah, that's
passed
what I'm talking about, is the stimulus packages, which I'm not saying were bad. I think something had to be done, and both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, they each passed about half, you know, and it added up to between $6 and $7 trillion.
Yeah.
But I don't think the government can do that and put a $7 trillion stimulus package within a couple year period, 2-3 year period, and not have inflation rise, regardless of the supply chain issue, right? I mean,
And so the question then is, when you're facing both of these factors, how do you know which one was a bigger deal? Because they both are big. And what economists would do is they'd say, well, can we find examples in the world where a country did one but not the other? They experienced one, not the other. And Europe is very interesting here. Japan is interesting. Australia is interesting. These other advanced countries who all experienced inflation increases, but did not all experience the demand policy that the United States did. I think that's very convincing evidence that it was more about supply than demand. And here's the other part that I'll put in, which is, notice the inflation went up and then it went back down again pretty quickly. It was a 2-year span where it went up and then comes back down again. If we had kind of been pumping up demand and we got something like a 1970s style inflation, I think it would have been a little harder to bring that inflation down.
that makes sense.
That looks much more like a shock to me.
You're setting me straight. I'm not an economist, so
so I don't know what percentages to put on that.
Sure.
3/4 supply, 1/4 demand, 2/3, 1/3. I somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Is where I would go. And last thing I'll say about that is, in some ways, it's always a supply and demand problem, because if we, for instance, if we had increased demand and we had sent out all these checks, but supply had increased, we wouldn't have had any inflation. And vice versa, we had that supply drop and we hadn't sent any checks out and we had let demand fall, we also wouldn't have had as much inflation. So it kind of they're tied together a little bit.
I see.
Yeah, that's why I was just gonna say the exact same thing, where I wish a lot of people would understand the supply demand graphs. I think you could explain pretty much anything with that, but I know it's not a normal thing to explain, because even with my friends, trying to explain the tariff stuff, I go on the board and start drawing the supply and demand graphs. But I agree. It's always either a supply or demand issue.
You're going to lose them quick, Jose, with your graphs.
That's true. One last thing I'll kind of add to all of this is, there is a great book if you really like nerdy stuff about financial crises. Carmen Reithart and Ken Rogoff wrote this book a number of years ago. It's and they wrote it on what happens to countries after financial crises. Now, financial crises can come from a lot of different things. For instance, in 2008, we had one because of our housing market bubble burst. But some of these countries experienced problems where you couldn't finance your debt anymore, and you had that sudden stop. And what they found overwhelmingly, time after time, is recovery is very difficult from those. So remember, COVID happened, we had a little mini recession, and then we kind of got right back to what we were doing. But in 2008, we didn't. It took a long time to come back. And so when we're thinking about the risk of this budget deficit and those sudden stops, where let's say Buster said, boy, we're going to charge much higher interest rates for U.S. debt, and there's going to be a crisis here. That's something that you really want to avoid, because those financial crises, they take years to recover from.
Yeah. And what was the name of the book? I'm sorry.
So it's called This Time is Different. And
Oh,
it's
yes.
by Carmen Reinhardt and Ken Rogoff. And of course the title is a little facetious because
Yeah.
it's not different. It happens the same every time. So
No,
And
yeah, I
the
remember
titles
that.
of the book are to grab you, like the
Yeah.
like the deficit doesn't matter book.
Yeah.
I just recently interviewed David McKnight, and he brought up MMT, not necessarily in a positive light. So he's an author that wrote a book about mainly taxes. He's a tax guy, more talking about the
Yeah.
advantages of Roths and things like that. But
I see.
The Power of Zero is his
Oh,
book.
yeah. I've
Yeah.
read his book.
Yeah.
I've read his book.
It's actually The Power of Zero is a great book.
Yeah.
He's a pretty good writer. Whether you agree with everything, you're always going to be able to pick apart, oh, I disagree with this part of it, or
Mhm.
but it was interesting both in this conversation and he's studied economics and written books about finance a lot and been in this world a lot more on the tax side, but also budget deficit ties in with taxes, of course, as it does everything, interest rates. And that MMT, I'd like to do a whole show on that, because that's interesting, because I mean, it's coming up more and more. People are trying to address it, probably because of what's her name, Stephanie or whoever wrote that book.
And I would say new ideas are great. The problem is these aren't new. This is kind of retreading stuff that was kind of like Abel Lerner's hypothesis in the early 20th century. And this stuff actually was talked about, and lessons were learned from this. And it was thought that it was not sound from a theoretical
dismissed.
and so there's a reason why it was dismissed. And we do see this. We're a society now. We keep retreading all this old stuff. We want the gold standard back, and all of these things that they were issues that were kind of decided many decades ago.
Yeah.
John Maynard Keynes called it a barbarous relic, the gold standard. So anyway, it's always good to think about things, but let's have new things, not things that we've already covered. That's ancient history.
Plus, at some temperature, gold melts, and then what are you going to do, right, Jose? I mean, Jose can attest to that.
Exactly. No, we talked about the gold standard with Professor Tang, your colleague, and that she did a good job of explaining why we're not going back.
No,
it always comes up, and people are, I think, fundamentally uncomfortable with paper money. Because it's just like, it just seems like, well, what do you mean? This is worth nothing. It's just, and so I think they keep looking for some kind of alternative. And of course, at that time we had paper money. It was just backed by gold. You weren't actually using gold for transactions. You just had the paper money that's backed by gold. But we're not going back there. There's an interesting, the last thing I'll say is, if you want to look at why the gold standard, economists think gold standard is a terrible idea, look at countries' economic growth when they left the gold standard during the Great Depression. And the later that they left it, the worse they did. And so, for instance, France hangs on way too long, horrible, economic recession, and didn't recover very quickly. Japan leaves earlier. They recover faster. And there are real reasons why that it's not just a random relationship. There's theoretical reasons why that makes sense, but that is the most overwhelming evidence I've seen for this is not a good idea.
Good. Well, Professor Hill, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's a blast. I hope to have you again in the future, talk about something else, or maybe even this turns into something even bigger, and then we have to talk about it even more.
An even bigger, more beautiful bill. That's the next one.
I hope not. We'll have to figure this one out first. I think they're going to be figuring out and defining the things in this bill for a long time.
Yeah.
So.
I did, and I wrote down some things about what you want your tax code to be. And one of them is you want it to be simple. You want people to be very easily figure out. Like, if we think that the tax code creates incentives for people, they have to know what the tax code is in order to have the incentive.
Right. And that's why I brought up early in the show, I think the best for me personally and my family and my dad, who I've seen, the one thing, people can say positive, negatives. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. And believe me, there are plenty of things I don't like. The one thing I do like about the initial Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and that has been kept, is the standard deduction, because it's simplified things and people get that. It's easy to grasp. And the people in the middle class, I think that actually helped. Middle and upper middle, that standard deduction increasing to what, $25,000, and now for people ages 65 and over, it's an additional $6,000. That really helps with taxes. And because otherwise, my wife and I did side businesses, so we could deduct a lot of things, but wow, it got complicated, and you had to work with somebody who knew, and it's just like, can we deduct that? And I'd hear different things. And
yeah, the itemizers didn't like that because they kind of paid for it by getting rid of the personal exemption.
Right.
So if you're taking the standard deduction and you were going to anyway, you were kind of a little better off, but the itemizers didn't care for that.
Right. And we used to itemize, and my mom did a great job for us. But we came out ahead. I mean, it's just a lot of work. It depends on what level you are with itemizing and how much you're able to itemize, and if you're independently contracted. I mean, it affects different people in different ways.
And of course, we didn't even get into the SALT deduction here.
Oh,
one of the,
we're gonna leave it for a different show.
State and local taxes, right? Yeah. All right. Well, great. I love Alex. I think you're the best guest we've ever had. I absolutely love hearing from you. Jose, good job getting an A-lister. I mean, look at this. An economist who teaches at ASU. Here, I thought ASU, maybe safety school, maybe a party college, but look at this.
Not
the research.
Jose, you're proof that you can learn something.
Yeah.
You can learn something at ASU. Just take Alex class.
Imagine that.
Yeah,
well, that won't be too hard. He teaches everything, it seems like.
That's good.
That's a problem.
They keep you busy. All right. Well, hey, Jose, let people know if they have questions or want a financial plan in place. Work with a trusted fiduciary like you and Brad, who you do what you do to help people and help them grow their finances or have a successful retirement. How can people get a hold of you?
They can give us a call at 888-390-5277 for a no-charge consultation, or they can go to the website, financialarmorshow.com, and book it there.
All right, sounds good. And that does it for today's episode of the Financial Armor Show with our host, Jose Rodriguez.